Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi isanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqatihi wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, when you look at the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, particularly the years of his mission, you will find that the idolaters made many attempts to suppress him in calling people to Islam and serving his community. And those attempts of suppression, they began with cordial requests and negotiations, or at least attempted negotiations. They would approach his family members and they would try to persuade them to get him to stop. And their negotiations were offering him not only position and power, but also wealth and women. When they realized that the Prophet ﷺ would not back down, when they realized that he could not be bought, they ramped up their efforts by putting pressure on his weaker followers. They tortured some and they killed some. They launched propaganda campaigns against the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, trying to vilify them. They attempted to destroy their economy, the Muslims' economy, and to starve them when they enacted the boycott, which created what we would call a humanitarian crisis today. Eventually, that led them to an attempted assassination of the Prophet ﷺ. And when that failed, and he managed to migrate to establish an independent state, this is extremely key. It's a pivotal moment in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. When he migrated to establish an independent state, it marked the beginning of the end for the Quraysh. And while of course it would take several hard-fought years of freedom and independence, along with the Prophet's strategic navigation of the local politics, at the end the Muslims were victorious, and it happened in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. And I believe throughout that process, throughout that journey to victory, there are several key factors that can be attributed to their success. And today I want to mention just a few of those that I think are absolutely important for us to keep in mind right now, today. The first of those factors was that the companions were committed to their Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Not only did they believe in him, but they honored him. He was given a lofty position, not only in their communities as the leader of the faithful, but in their hearts as the leader of mankind. They looked to him for guidance, and they supported him when their support was called upon. This was one of the key factors to their success. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِهِ وَعَزَّرُوهُ وَنَصَرُوهُ وَاتَّبَعُوا النُّورَ الَّذِي أُنزِلَ مَعَهُ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. This verse means only those who believe in him. The verse is talking about the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Those who believe in him, who honor him and support him. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَصَرُوهُ, that they supported him, it means they supported him against his adversaries and his enemies. Meaning they fought for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they follow the light sent down to him, they will be successful. Success will be granted to them. The scholars of the Quran, they say the success is both in this life and in the next. So the success that they were given in this life was victory over their enemies, the oppressors, the idolaters of Quraysh. That persecuted them, that tried to kill the Prophet ﷺ, that killed many of the companions, that took their wealth, that took their land, that took their homes. They were given success, and all of that was restored. They were given victory and restoration. And that leads to the next point. The elements of this verse lend itself to the next major principle, and that is that the companions did their very best to adhere to that light that was sent down with the Prophet ﷺ. They gave it their all, following the principles of their faith and propagating their religion. They spread Islam. They adhered to it and they spread it. This was one of the key factors to their success. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran, Surah Muhammad. Believe it or not, chapter 47, verse number 7, he says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu in tansurullaha yansurkum wa yuthabbit aqdamukum. O believers, if you support Allah, He will support you and make your feet firm. And from this verse, the companions knew that if they supported Allah's religion, that's what it means to support Allah, is to support Allah's religion, to support Allah's messenger. By putting it into practice and propagating it, He would in turn grant them victory. He says, وَيُثَبِّتْ وَيَنْصُرْكُمْ وَيُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ. He will give you victory and make your feet firm, meaning you will be victorious over your enemies. So they knew they had to adhere to their religion. They had to cling to their faith. They had to be guided in the face of adversity and hardship by the principles of Islam. And in the following verses, right after that verse, they also understood that if they denied faith by turning away from His religion, turning away in disgust, they would be doomed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَالَّذِينَ وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَتَعْسَلْ لَهُمْ وَأَضَلَّ أَعْمَالَهُمْ. As for the disbelievers, those who denied faith, may they be doomed, and may He render their deeds void. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ كَرِهُوا مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأَحْبَطَ أَعْمَالَهُم. That's because they detest what Allah has revealed. They despise the guidance of faith. And so they turn away from it. They knew they had to adhere, and they could not turn away because their deeds would have been rendered void. Brothers and sisters, based on the principles of their faith, they knew that not only did they have to find bravery in reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they had to patiently endure hardship, and they had to be willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. Not only that, but they knew they would have to distance and disavow themselves from the oppressors. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَا تَرْكَنُوا إِلَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا فَتَمَسَّكُمُ النَّارِ. And do not incline toward those who do wrong, lest you be touched by fire. Do not, I got to repeat this. The meaning of it is, do not incline toward those who do wrong, those who are oppressive, lest you be touched by fire. Ibn Abbas, the great companion of the Prophet ﷺ, he said, what this means is that you do not compromise with them. You do not side with those who do wrong. It means you do not seek assistance from the oppressors, because it will be as if you are condoning their evil. In other words, you cannot normalize that behavior. You cannot normalize ties with oppressors, regardless of how many summits you might hold, or how wonderful the names of the agreements or accords are. Good is not born from evil. Oppression and evil cannot be embraced and sided with, cooperated with. It cannot be accepted. It must be snuffed out. Even if it seems like it's the right thing to do, to make accords with oppressors. Maybe because it would stabilize your position of power, or it might boost your economy and line your pockets. Ultimately, you'll be subject to their oppression. If it's not today, it will certainly be tomorrow, and you will end up losing out for selling your faith and selling out the oppressed, when it's a duty of the faithful to stand up and to defend those that are being taken advantage of. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا لَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ مِنْ أَوْلِيَاءَ ثُمَّ لَا تُنصَرُونَ. To continue and finish the verse, and you have no protector besides Allah, and then you will not be helped. Meaning, in the hereafter, when you have lost everything for selling out, you will not have a victor to save you from that destruction. So they had to disavow themselves and disassociate themselves with the oppressors. Some of them were family members, tribesmen, clansmen. They had to now remove that relationship. It was off the table. And because they had to disavow themselves from the oppressors, they had to rely on each other. They knew that if they stood with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they stood with His messenger, and they stood with their fellow believers, they would be victorious. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 56, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَإِنَّ حِزْبَ اللَّهِ هُمُ الْغَالِبُونَ. Whoever allies themselves with Allah, His messenger, and the fellow believers, then it is certainly Allah's party that will prevail. To align yourself with faith and the people of faith is a fundamental element to success. And in order for them to do that, to rely on one another, it meant that they had to work together to remain united. The companions we often think of as a completely harmonious society. In many of our minds, when we think of the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it's picturesque. And while they, of course, are the best of companions, they didn't always see eye to eye. There were incidents which they argued with one another. They disagreed with each other. They didn't arrive at the same conclusions. They were going through growing pains as a community, trying to merge the Muhajirun and the Ansar, trying to cope with the internal dynamics of Medina. But they knew that if they divided among themselves, they would be weakened. And it would weaken their ability to fight against evil. To fight against evil and overcome oppression. And so instead of bickering with each other and letting that weaken their ranks, they had to live with each other in patience. They had to be patient with one another and not jump ship at the first sign of discomfort and discord. It's a terrible trait. The moment that there's friction between you and your Muslim community, you say, I'm done, that's it. Where are you going? Who are you going to be with? Or are we all just supposed to be on our own? There's no power and there's no strength in that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ وَاصْبِرُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ. He says, obey Allah and His messenger, and do not dispute with one another, for you would be discouraged with the back and forth, the bickering, the disagreements. You would be discouraged and you would be weakened because you would part ways. Rather persevere, for indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with those who persevere. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضاه ونصلي ونسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Brothers and sisters, there's a recent interview that I listened to. Interview was with Ilan Pappé. Maybe you've heard of his name, especially in recent times. He's the famous Israeli historian and political scientist. Authored numerous books regarding Israel and Palestine. And he said that what we're seeing today, right now, this interview was only a few days ago, is the beginning of the end of the Israeli colonial project. And he noted that history has been moving towards decolonialization, to the end of settler colonial projects. And the Muslim world is all too familiar with that. Israel, on the other hand, that's the direction of the world. Israel, on the other hand, he said, is moving towards enhancing its settler colonial project, which is maintained through state apparatus, requiring billions of dollars in international support and hundreds of thousands of personnel. Basically, simply put, it's becoming unsustainable. Not only economically unsustainable, but it's quickly losing domestic, meaning the domestic support there, as well as global support, including here in the United States. And this loss of support will result in a devastating impact on the political players that are driving that occupation machinery. There are many people around the world that are beginning to see their struggle for justice attached and connected to the Palestinian struggle for justice. And while that level of support being lost has yet to influence any government to take decisive steps to ending the occupation, it certainly has the potential to do so. The beginning of the end. If you remember, the Hijrah, we could say, marked the beginning of the end for the idolaters of Quraysh. But it still took time. It still took a great deal of effort to reach its conclusion. And that's what lies ahead of us today. That momentum continues to grow. The solidarity with the Palestinian cause continues to grow. And all you have to do is look at the Palestinian-led BDS movement. You can see that the boycott and divestment elements of that movement are working. And those elements lead to the pressure which causes sanctions. It's basically what we saw when South Africa was fighting against apartheid. It's the same steps that were taken, and that movement is based on what happened then. There's something important to note, however. While things are going in, we hope, a very good direction, as he says, the beginning of the end, he points out that it is, however, a very dangerous moment for not only the Palestinian people, but the supporters of them, because these regimes always fight for their life with the most ruthless and most powerfully lethal weapons in their arsenal. Holding on to anything that they can, they will fight for their lives, for their existence, and this is what we can see unfolding in front of our eyes today. It's very clear as the Palestinian death toll continues to arise. Approximately 18,600 souls. 18,600 souls. I remember when it was 10,000. And we're at 2 months. Think about today is the 8th. It's now 2 months and we've seen 18,600 lives lost, killed. Whereas the official Israeli death toll has been revised again and is lowered, actually, to 1,147. And while I believe the ruthless nature of this response was built on anger and fear, the campaign is now presenting all signs of desperation. And desperation is a clear indication of fragility. It's becoming very fragile. You know, it's the only state that lobbies for its existence, not for its policies, not for economic performance, but for moral justification. And it's losing that battle. And so it's fragile and therefore desperate. The desperation to maintain that moral justification is becoming so palpable that they can't even bear to be questioned or criticized. They're intolerant of criticism from their local population, as we've been seeing from the beginning through many suspensions, terminations, and arrests of both Palestinian and Jewish members of their society. And now they're moving to suppress any criticism here in the United States. If you look at House Resolution 894, which was drafted by the House GOP and passed this week, that means the Republicans drafted this resolution, but it was supported by 95 Democrats, including our representative, Norcross, right here. And the resolution states essentially that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, effectively condemning any criticism of the Israeli state. It also criticizes several protest chants for Palestinian freedom that are protected under the First Amendment. Not only do they want to silence any criticism, but they want support for Palestinian liberation to be declared hate speech. That's how desperate it's become. And I mention this to you as it becomes more and more fragile, because the more fragile it becomes, the more unhinged they are likely to be. And so we have to remember, it's very important that we remember and are stabilized by the principles of our faith that led to the success of the first generation. We need to remember the words of our great Imam Malik ibn Anas. He said, لَنْ يُصْلِحَ آخِرَ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ إِلَّا مَا أَصْلَحَ أَوَّلَهَا. He said, the last of this ummah will not be set aright except by that which set aright the first part of this ummah. Meaning that which gave them success will be that which gives us success. And so, when they realize, and they're coming to that realization very quickly, that we're not backing down, we're not going to get tired, we're not going to forget, and we're not going to give up, we need to expect that things will be tough and that sacrifices will have to be made. And we should see this as a sign of pending victory. We should be encouraged to continue our struggle against oppression and evil and to lean into the principles of our faith that were the means of success for the Prophet ﷺ and his great companions. If we too want success, we need unwavering commitment to our Prophet ﷺ. That's number one. We need to honor him. We need to look to him for guidance and to support him by furthering his legacy. We need to practice our faith and propagate it to the best of our abilities. We need to challenge ourselves to improve upon and elevate our religious commitment by ridding our lives of sin and increasing our religious observances. We need to stop aligning ourselves with the oppressors and looking for them to help. For far too long, we've had this infatuation with their lifestyle and their worldview. For far too long, we've craved their attention and recognition. For far too long, we've hoped in some kind of twisted, deranged way that they would adopt us into their club and include us for some reason. And this is both on an individual and leadership level. And I can't express how disappointing it is on the leadership level. We ask Allah for rectification. And this has brought us nothing but shame and defeat. Instead, we need to reignite a commitment to our own communities, strengthening our own communities, the people of faith. And we have to weed out elements of hypocrisy and disbelief. Brothers and sisters, we need to learn how to live with each other in a spirit of mercy, compassion, and patience, so that we can stand united, strongly united, and not divided and weak. And always we have to remember that the good end is promised to the pious. So we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pardon us, and that He forgive us for our mistakes, that He guide us to the straight path and protect us from deviation. We ask that He keep us safe and keep our families safe from those who seek to harm us. We ask that He liberate and restore those who are oppressed around the globe and deliver our brothers and sisters in Palestine from the hands of the wicked. Allahumma yassir wa la tu'assir wa tammim bil khair wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa akhiru da'wana.